Ladies and gentlemen, what we are witnessing right now in the Middle East is not just another regional conflict. What we are watching is the beginning of something far larger, something that could reshape the balance of power across the entire world. 3 days into this war with Iran, one thing has already become clear. This is not going to be a short war. The expectation in Washington appeared to be that a quick, decisive strike, something resembling a regime change operation, would force Tehran to collapse or capitulate. But that assumption is already collapsing under the weight of reality. Iran has responded with force, and more importantly, with strategy. Within the first phase of this conflict, Iranian forces reportedly targeted at least 27 military installations and logistical hubs across the region. These targets stretch from Turkey's Incirlik air base down to the Gulf states and the Emirates. What this means is simple. The war has already spread beyond Israel and Iran. It has effectively become a regional conflict. Kanglish, auto-generated, dog. And when a war spreads across the Persian Gulf, the consequences ripple through the entire global economy. Oil markets reacted almost immediately. Prices surged sharply on the expectation that supply lines could be disrupted. Shipping routes are now uncertain. Ports, refineries, and airports across the Gulf region have come under attack. Millions of foreign workers, Indians, Europeans, Americans, are effectively stranded across the Emirates. Global trade moving through the Gulf is already slowing. In other words, the economic consequences of this war may ultimately prove as damaging as the military ones. But the battlefield itself tells an even more troubling story. One of the most striking developments so far is the performance of Iranian drone and missile systems. Cheap drones? Systems that cost a fraction of the sophisticated air defenses deployed across the Gulf have managed to disable airports, strike logistical facilities, and disrupt critical infrastructure. This reveals something we have seen repeatedly in modern warfare. Low-cost, mass-produced weapons are increasingly defeating the most expensive defense systems ever built. This is not just happening in the Middle East. We saw similar patterns in Ukraine. We saw it in Nagorno-Karabakh. And we are seeing it again now. But perhaps the most serious problem for the United States and its allies is not tactical. It's logistical. War at this scale requires enormous quantities of missiles, ammunition, and resupply. And the United States has already spent years transferring large stockpiles of precision weapons to Ukraine. Now those inventories are under strain. Intercepting a single incoming missile may require 2 or 3 defensive interceptors. If hundreds of missiles are launched, the math becomes brutal very quickly. And the reality is that Western defense industries cannot replenish these weapons fast enough during an active war. Meanwhile, Iran's strategy is very different. Iran does not need to defeat the United States militarily. Iran only needs to survive. If Iran survives, and if the war continues long enough, the strategic balance begins to shift. Because the longer this war lasts, the weaker the United States and Israel appear to the rest of the world. And perception matters enormously in geopolitics. For decades, American military power has rested not only on its capabilities, but also on its reputation. Allies believed that the United States was unstoppable. Adversaries believed it was dangerous to challenge Washington directly. But wars test reputations. And once that reputation begins to erode, alliances start to weaken. Countries begin asking new questions. Is American protection reliable? Is American power truly overwhelming? And perhaps most importantly, should we continue aligning ourselves with Washington? Those questions are already being asked quietly across Asia, the Middle East, and even Europe. But there is an even deeper issue here. The United States appears to have entered this war without a clear strategic objective. Tactics can win battles, Doig. Strategy wins wars. And right now it is not clear what the strategic goal actually is. Is it regime change in Iran? If so, that is a staggering challenge. Iran is not a small state. It is a country of more than 90 million people, spread across a territory roughly the size of Western Europe. Its military capabilities are widely dispersed. Many of its systems are mobile, And perhaps most importantly, Iran is not simply a modern political regime. Iran is Persia. It is a civilization that has existed for more than 2,000 years. Civilizations do not collapse easily under bombardment. History teaches us that very clearly. You can destroy armies. You can remove leaders. But you cannot bomb a civilization into submission. In fact, attacks often produce the opposite effect. They unify populations that were previously divided, and there is growing evidence that this may already be happening inside Iran. But the geopolitical consequences of this war extend far beyond Iran itself. Major powers are watching closely. China depends heavily on energy imports from the Persian Gulf. India depends on millions of barrels of oil flowing through the region every single day. Russia sees Iran as a strategic partner within the emerging multipolar world. None of these countries benefit from the destruction of Iran, and none of them want to see the United States dominate the region indefinitely. So, the longer this war continues, the greater the pressure will become for outside powers to intervene diplomatically, or perhaps even more directly. There is also the ever-present risk of escalation. If Israel were ever to consider using a tactical nuclear weapon to halt Iranian missile attacks, the geopolitical consequences would be enormous. Such an action could potentially draw Russia and China directly into the crisis. At that point, the conflict could expand far beyond anything we have seen so far, and the world would enter extremely dangerous territory. But even without nuclear escalation, the economic consequences of this war may already be reshaping the global order. Energy prices are rising. Trade routes are being disrupted. Financial markets are becoming unstable. And there are growing signs that the US dollar's dominance in global trade is slowly eroding. Countries around the world are increasingly exploring alternatives. If that trend accelerates during a prolonged Middle East war, the financial consequences for the United States could be severe. What we may be witnessing is not simply a war between Israel and Iran. We may be witnessing the early stages of a much larger transformation. The Middle East that emerged after the First World War, the system created by the old European powers, is already beginning to fracture. And American dominance in the region may be entering its final chapter. The truth is that the global balance of power is changing. New centers of power are rising in Asia. Regional powers are asserting their independence. And the world that Washington once dominated is slowly giving way to something new. How long this transition will take is impossible to say. But one thing is already clear. This war will not end quickly. And whatever the final outcome may be, the world that emerges afterward will look very different from the one we knew before it began. The old order is fading, and a new one is taking shape before our eyes.